A very good morning to all of you, all the dignitaries present here today, and to all the students as well. So we are here for the brainstorming session discussing various issues from flooding to street vendors and to urban density. So a variety of issues will be discussed here today, and I hope it will be, insightful for all of us. Let's start by welcoming our dignitaries. I would like we have a few dignitaries who have joined us online as well. I would like to start by welcoming President ITPI Delhi, Dr. D.S. Meshram sir. I would like to welcome Secretary General ITPI Delhi, Pradeep Kapoor sir. I would like to welcome Chairman ITPI MRC Pune Center, Milind Patil sir. I would like to welcome Council Member ITPI Jitendra Bhopre sir. We have a few dignitaries present here with us today, so I would like to welcome them with a bouquet. I request the students of COAP to please present a bouquet to Chairman Building Committee ITPI MRC Pune Chapter Ravindra Mankar sir. A warm welcome to convener ITPI MRC Pune Center, Prabhakar Nair sir. I would like to welcome Secretary MRC Mumbai Center, Jagdish Patil sir. He is not here with us right now. I would like to welcome member ITPI MRC Pune Center, Professor Dr. Rawar sir, who is also my guide. So welcome to sir. I would like to welcome member secretary ITPI MRC Pune Center, Sharad Patil sir. Few of the dignitaries joined online are Director, Town Planning and Valuation Department, Maharashtra, Avinash Patil sir, former Director, Town Planning for Valuation, Town Planning and Valuation Department, Maharashtra, Sri Lange sir is actually here with us. So a warm welcome to you, sir. Also, former Director, Town Planning and Valuation Department, Maharashtra, Sri Rajan Koch sir has joined us online. So a warm welcome to you as well, sir. So let us begin by a small welcome address by Ravindra Mankar sir. So over to you.
Everybody. On behalf of the ITPI MRC, I, Ravindra Kumar Mankar, Chairman Building Committee, welcome Honorable President Dr. Meshram sir, Honorable Secretary General Shri Pradeep Kapoor sir, and all the members who are present here and students who are present here, and also the members who are online for the discussion on the street vending in urban areas by Dr. Asha Panse. The blue line and red line is very important in planning, urban planning. With the diligence, we have to draw it properly in urban areas. Ms. Yuangi will give the lecture on blue line and red line, that is flood control measures. And considering the vertical development, the densities are very important. We hear it from Ms. Mrudula. I hand it over to Shri Rawal sir for further coordination of the today's workshop.
were just meeting in this month for an annual general meeting in Mumbai, and that time we were discussing that why not have some kind of workshop brainstorming session when the issue of flood water came. Some of my fellow planners from Mumbai, and then I thought that it's a good idea that some of the studies done by PG students should be presented. They are worth to refer. Many times it happens that the flood is not the planner's domain. It is always said that it is the engineer's domain, but it is not like that. Shivangi's study will explain all these things about flood risk assessment. Similarly, street vending and urban planning. So this is another study which always the planners overlook towards this activity in cities around, and we have done. Isha has done her PhD on that street vending. What are the relationship? How does we can take it to consideration for the planning? So usually development plan preparation or local area plan preparation. So and the third one is about the density, and we know that the development plan gives the shape to the city, and the vertical development happens with our DCPRs and zoning regulation. So what happens if these vertical development takes place as per the DCPR? Usually all the planning you see is for livability or quality of life. So basic definition of urban planning itself says that whatever we are doing is for the people and for the quality of life and the livability. So Mridula wanted to have some focus group opinion on her topic, that which are the drivers for density decision making. So the topic she will present. So not taking more time, we will start with the presentation itself, because there are many planners are waiting online also to listen. So we will already, the program is late, so we will start with the first presentation, that is street vending and urban planning.
I welcome Asha for the street vending. Amos, please give us a name. Isha. We welcome Ms. Shivangi also. Today's third speaker is Ms. Mridula. Amod, our member, is welcoming.
Thank you, Ravindra sir. So, since I started my studies somewhere in 2016, and at that time, street vendors policy, which was passed by the legislation of India in 2014, had recently come up, and there were discussions that were happening around this policy. We stand here today in 2022 looking back at how this particular policy has contributed in the development of cities today. Street vendors is a phenomenon which we encounter every day. they have become such a big part of our life, and they are so prominently present, and yet we take their presence for granted unless there is some issues that are caused, like traffic congestion or pedestrian inconvenience because of the vendors, or if we want to buy something, we fail to notice their presence. So this particular presentation today, yes, it is centered around my PhD topic, but out of that, I will be only discussing two parts. First part is role of urban planners in the implementation of street vendors policy 2014, and how the spatial inclusion of street vendors is possible. This I will be presenting through empirical study which was done. So, to begin with, definitions form a critical part whenever we talk about legislation. The first chapter is also always about the definitions. So these are the various definitions given of street vendors. We call them hawkers, fairy wala, hath gadi wala, pathari wala, so many local names as well. So the definition that most perfectly describes the activity of street vending and street vendors is that an activity of economic exchange. It can be anything. Cobblers don't sell anything, but they provide us with an important service. So, activity of economic exchange characterized by the precarious occupation of public space. Economic activity that happens on the public space which was not designed for them, yet that activity is happening, and I think that best defines the activity of street vending. This picture captures the essence of that particular definition. Moving on. The study for street vending is prompted, the need for inclusion of street vending. Why are we here today? Why are we talking about role of planners in the inclusion of street vendors in the city is prompted by three things. Firstly, it is the United Nations Habitat 3 conference which came up with a new urban agenda which indicates the need of street vendors for inclusive governance, and they particularly talk about inclusion in the urban fabric, which is very much the domain of planners. The second is about the World Bank strategy, which also talks about social inclusion, it talks about spatial inclusion and economic inclusion. The third is that we cannot ignore the sheer numbers which are growing every day. Just last week, I read a news which talked that the number of street vendors post-pandemic has increased significantly. Obviously, pandemic resulted in a lot of losses of employment for many of the people, and they have come to street vending because of the low investment, and the entry is easier in this particular field. Here, I have not expressed in terms of numbers. I have expressed it in terms of percentage of workforce, because number of street vendor is extremely difficult. Few of the studies have noted down, we do have the numbers, but the exact number of street vendors has obviously not been documented by any of our urban local bodies. However, just to give a fair idea, there are about, I think 10 million street vendors according to the Ministry of Urban Poverty Alleviation, this data is from 2018. Mumbai contributes to 2,50,000 of vendors, whereas in Delhi the number is as high as 4,50,000. The Street Vendors Act 2014 itself states that the street vendors, you should consider 2% of the urban population as street vendors. So 2%. Today the population of Pune is almost 39 lakh or 3.9 million, and 2% of that comes to around 78,000 street vendors in Pune itself. So there are the sheer numbers which we as planners cannot ignore, because it obviously deals with urban space. And the Street Vendors Act actually, the Street Vendors Act, the name of this act, the full name of this act is Street Vendors Act, Livelihood Protection and Regulation. So it talks about livelihood protection of street vendors, but it also talks about regulating the number of street vendors. And this is what was the starting point for my study. Moving on. In general, the Street Vendors Act, which forms the basis of the study, asks for the implementation of the Act in 5 stages. So after the central government passed this particular legislation, it is expected that the state governments come up with their own policies within the framework of the Street Vendors Act. Later on, every urban local body is expected to set up a town vending committee, which comprises of few members of street vendors and few members of urban administration. They have not exclusively mentioned urban planners, though I think here they play an important role. So a TVC has to be set up, and then the third part is about doing a survey and registration. So in 2022, currently, many states have reached up to the third stage, which is they do have documentation of street vendors in some or the other form. However, the fourth step, for which us as planners it is important, inclusion of street vendors in the urban fabric. In fact, Street Vendors Act does mention provision of space for street vending in the development plan itself. So spatial norms, marking of street vendor zones, marking of no vending zones. So currently this is happening on the basis of traffic. So traffic department is the one which is consulted with. I am talking exclusively about the Pune scenario, but through literature, this scenario is common everywhere. It's the traffic department which comes up with the suggestions regarding the no vending or vending zones. And this, I think, is an incomplete point of view. The second is governance and implementation. So this act provides for a grievance redressal system and for penal provisions as well as it takes a strong stand against the harassment of vendors. During the course of my study in 4 years, I started noticing street vendors a lot, but I've seen so many eviction actions that are happening. PNC, a vehicle of PNC encroachment department, and surprisingly, ironically, actually, the department that looks after street vendors is termed as the encroachment department in Pune Municipal Corporation. So that itself suggests the stand that the urban local bodies are taking. So ideally, this should be a separate department, or at least the name should not be encroachment, because then you look at street vendors from that particular perspective. These are the 5 stages, and I think we as planners can contribute in stage 4, and that is what the study is about. Moving on. Quickly, in brief, this act provides for protection of livelihood and the rights of street vendors. Under the Constitution, Article 19(1)(g) states that every individual has a right to engage in the occupation of their choice. So this conflicts with the Article 19(1)(d), which states that the commuters have the right to freely move across the territory of India, and these 2 points here are extremely conflicting, and as planners I think we can do a much better job at balancing these 2. Moving on. So the next one, which was social security, it's an issue with informal sector all over India, so I would like to discuss it separately and not here. The third is regulation of street vending. So Street Vendors Act calls for regulation of street vending across India. So protection against eviction, it provides a negotiation channel. It certifies all street vendors without a cap on numbers. So whoever applies for the license is supposed to be given a license for street vending, but we are talking about regulating vendors. So how is that going to work? So I have tried to come up with an approximate number of street vendors which would be feasible and which would balance the negative and the positive impacts of street vending. We'll come to that later, and obviously grievance redress. So the salient policy problem was about the contrasting and competing interest of the use of public space. So apart from vendors, there are local residents, traffic, urban space managers who are also a stakeholder of this problem. So this is not as simple as giving in to the street vendors' demand, but it is about management and the right kind of management. Can we go to the next slide? So taking this into consideration, the study was done in a 3-pronged manner. So the first, we talk about the activity of street vending itself. This study has been carried across various cities of India and over the world. It is kind of mapping the socio-economic and the activity profile of the vendors. So this part is widely covered in literature as well. Impact of street vending, what kind of impact does this have? This is indirectly covered in literature, and we know that for our daily needs, even we depend on street vendors. चौकातला street vendor आहे ज्याच्याकडून आपण भाजी घेतो. Unlike the Western culture, we do not store vegetables for 10-15 days. It's a part of our culture. It's part of our lifestyle. That is why street vendors are important. In West Bengal, every house depends on street vendors for a fresh supply of fish. In Goa, it is about bread. A street vendor comes to Goan houses with a basket of bread 2 times a day. that is their indigenous. Now, obviously, the things have changed. It's more cosmopolitan, but that is how it was. Third, as planners, we would be interested in spatial relationships of street vendors with the city. So this study talks about these three dimensions. I won't go into the detail of it, but for this particular study, data was collected at city level. PMC cooperated a lot. Encroachment department gave me the data as well as mapping of the street vendors. In fact, I should mention that Pune Municipal Corporation is one of the few municipal corporations who have done a GIS-based mapping of street vendors, and that proved extremely useful for my study. I have also collected area level primary data because the secondary data had certain gaps and not all the aspects that I wanted to study were covered in this. And then I went on to asking the people, asking the local residents who are the stakeholders of the public space in their neighborhood about their perception on street vendors. So this is the three kinds of data which I have used for the study. Now let us look at the third step of the Street Vending Act, which talks about registration and survey of street vendors. How we as planners can help or contribute in this particular step. This is the data of street vendors that they take when the street vendor wants to register with the corporation. In 2019, I think it was September 2019 when I collected this data, so 16,000 street vendors were mapped and 28,000 vendors in all. Out of 16,000 were registered vendors and there were a total number of 28,000 vendors. So remaining applications were pending with the PMC. So this is the biometric data they take. This is just one of the sample of the data where they take the name. Now look at the name of the business. So it's written in a variety of manner. Someone selling CDs, someone selling tea, okay? So this typology has to be managed properly. This data won't be useful if we do not categorize it in the right way. And this categorization has to be done according to what is useful for us in spatial management. Business address was given and this was, their photo was taken. So this is for the non-registered vendor. Can we move to the next slide? This data, this particular sheet is easily available on the PMC website under the open data source. So here they have collected a data of registered street vendors. So even here, for us as planners, the interest is in the type of business because type of business dictates the amount of space they would need. We all know that a chai stall will need more space because there will be people standing around chatting, using it for informal discussions. However, look at this particular column here. They have mentioned the type of displays, hatkari, which is handcraft, cutlery seller, coconut seller. So categories are not correctly mentioned, or a wide variety of categories has just been listed down, which does not prove useful. However, what is useful for us as planners is that they have collected the latitude and longitude data. This forms the, this gives rise to a GIS-based map, which I have used for the study. Can we move on? This is the map that excellent work done by PMC actually. Spatial mapping of all the vendors. This is Pune city. Those who are familiar with the map know that Pune has grown radially. The core area is right in the heart of the center of the city, and we can so see the crowding of street vendors here. Now these maps were reinterpreted so that spatial inclusion could be discussed. This is the data of 16,000 vendors. Yes, so every activity needs a container. I was talking about how the typologies should be taken during this particular survey so that this proves useful for urban managers and city planners. So this comes down, classification of vendors, understanding the typology of the vendor. Every activity needs a container, okay? And that container depends, for street vendors, it depends on the type of the commodity that they sell. भाजीपाले वेगळे सेटअप मध्ये बसतात, त्यांना वेगळे डिस्प्ले बॉक्सेस लागतात, jewelry, wallets. So these kind of street vendors need a different kind of display. So considering the type of commodity sold as well as the display of the vendors, the street vendors were categorized into different typologies. So this is the matrix of typology which I would like to suggest that PMC or any urban local body for that matter should incorporate so that partial norms can be better defined. So these were the 20 types. This is in general the profiling of 16,000 vendors. This is obviously going to be different for different cities. And we can see here that food vendors who sell raw food, which include fruits and vegetables on ground. ज्याला आपण पथारी म्हणतो. In Pune, in local language we call it as pathari. They spread their display on the ground, either on boxes or on tarpaulin sheets. So these form 26% of the vendors, non-food on-ground vendors. So most of the vendors, more than 50% vendors here, are with displays spread on the ground. And when it is on the ground, there is no limit for the space that a vendor uses. Can we move on? So various legislations as well as urban design studies give different spatial norms for street vendors. Street vendor la zyada kiti pahiye. Bombay High Court, Supreme Court rather gives a space of 1 meter by 1 meter. Now 1 meter by 1 meter is almost similar to the space that we are using right now when we are sitting on the chair. So in that particular space, it is impossible for a street vendor to sit there himself and display his products. So this might not be enough. However, a lot of urban design based studies from CEPT and other universities come to a space of around 2 square meters. From my studies, different typologies have been mapped and spaces have been mentioned, and here the average space comes to around 2.2 square meters per vendor, considering the typology. So this is just a basic detail of time activity pattern of vendors. Here the important thing to note is that vendors work or are on that particular street, occupy that street for 11 hours straight. So they are not a temporary things that happen on street, but a permanent elements of street. I would like to skip this. It talks about gender, age group, but monthly income, 32% of the vendors have a monthly income of around 5 to 10,000, which is substantial. So vendors occupy space, they occupy on-street parking, they occupy the footpath or the pedestrian walkway. The indirect effect is this is a street. Those who are familiar with Pune, this is photo from Ferguson Street. We can move on. So this particular map of Pune city was generated. It's a basic hotspot map generated through GIS, which gives us the point density of street vendors. So the density of street vendors comes to around 150 to 350 vendors per square kilometers in urban core areas. So these are the red colored hotspots. So this is Mandai area in Pune. Here, this is the Karware Bridge area in Pune near the Ferguson Road. So these are a few hotspots which were later on taken for area-based study. The important thing is that this gives us a density of vendors, how many vendors are present per square kilometer. I would like to skip this. So obviously vendors are attracted to certain areas in the city. So the relationship of the vendors to the physical planning in terms of land use. So what type of vendor is attracted towards what type of land use, what type of vendors sit on what type of road, and what type of vendors sit on what type of road width. This was analyzed, and these are the conclusions that I would come to. First is the width of the road was associated with display. This is but obvious. According to the width of the road, the vendors choose their display. Whether it's a temporary tarpaulin structure, a stall, a handcart, they choose it accordingly. Type of a road is associated, type of the road in the sense road hierarchy. Here the road hierarchy used was from the urban design guidelines. So the road hierarchy followed was mobility corridors, feeder streets, neighborhood streets, and there is a certain category of streets called as the special streets, which also prove to be attraction points for vendors. Type of commodity sold is not related to road type or road width. It is exclusively related to the land use where that particular vendor locates himself. So they have their own intrinsic logic, which I have tried to decipher, and this is again triangulated by the observations. We can move on. So these kind of maps were generated where types of vendors were overlaid on land use. This is just one sample image. There are 6 sectors in Pune. So this is the core sector of Pune, sector 1, core area of Pune. So we can see the 20 different types of vendors here, which I had discussed, and these are overlaid on land use map, and what we can see is from this we can see what type of vendor is related to what type of land use, because from earlier slide we saw that there is a certain relation. So what relation exists has been deciphered. In simpler terms, without using any statistical tools, and I think even by plain pure logic, without me going through all these 16,000 vendors, it is very obvious, we do observe this, that mixed land use is the land use that attracts maximum number of vendors, But quantitatively, we can see here that 34% of the vendors sit near mixed land use, whereas in Pune Development Plan, mixed land use accounts for only 8.5 or 9% of the area. So 9% of the area in Pune city hosts 34% of the vendors in Pune city. So that is interesting. And similarly, commercial area, 6.29% of the commercial area hosts 20% of the vendors. So these two land uses are the hotspots or the attraction points for the vendors. So simplifying this, when it comes to relocation, apart from the traffic department, this is the kind of consideration that is required to make the relocation of vendors successful, because this particular matrix breaks down the logic with which they which land use the vendors prefer. So stalls, vendors who have stalls of non-food items. Non-food is books, jewelry, plastic items. So vendors with stalls prefer commercial land use. Example is the vendor selling jewelry. Similarly, services stall. These are stalls that don't sell anything but provide services like Xerox. They provide services like tailors, even tires and puncture shops. So these particular stalls are also located near commercial land use. On-ground services like in rainy days there are people who repair the umbrellas who come on the road. Cobblers are there all year round. So they don't have a stall or anything, they just have a small shop spread on the ground. So these type of vendors are also found in commercial areas. Similarly, in mixed land use areas, vendors with hand carts selling non-food items like jewelry, plastic items, some similar things, they prefer mixed land use. So now, this particular matrix will provide guidelines for us as to where to, if there is a question of relocation. Street vendor policy does talk about maintaining the location of street vendors, but a slight displacement from the location, this is what we have to consider. Obviously, prepared food hand carts which sell chai, chaat, bhel, fried snacks, so all these this type of vendors, they prefer public, semi-public or institutional areas as well as recreational areas. So that is how this matrix would help us. So when we talk about relation of vending with land use, this is the matrix that we come up with. And however, when we look at the relationship of street vendors to the road network in terms of road width as well as road hierarchy, similar maps were generated and the relationships that were found out were something like this. So width-wise, in Pune, 11 to 20 meter wide roads are 18%, which host 37% of the vendors. So these streets prove crucial. There is also one more reason why these streets prove crucial in Pune, especially in Pune for street vendors. That is because in Pune policy, streets which are 12 meter wide and more are the ones that have footpaths. So wherever there are footpaths, street vendors are found. That is why 11 to 20 meter wide roads. Here we have distribution of vendors according to the hierarchy of the roads. So feeder streets, also the collector streets, we can call them collector streets as well, constitute 14% of the entire road network of Pune and host 41% of the vendors. So these two form crucial focal points when we are making policy guidelines, spatial policy guidelines for street vendors. So through a lot of statistical analysis, we came to a conclusion of which type of road is preferred by which type of vendors. This is just for us to understand what type of statistical analysis was used. I would just like to summarize it. Can go ahead. So go ahead. I'll just explain the summary. So not all type of vendors are strongly associated with particular type of road, but the associations that were found out were non-food hand carts were attracted or were placed on mobility corridors. So non-food hand carts include plastic items, jewelry items, so all these type of hand carts were found on mobility corridors in Pune. Again, this road hierarchy is taken from the USDG, Urban Street Design Guidelines, PMC. Non-food vendors who sell their goods on the with an on-ground display are found near feeder roads. Obviously, feeder roads have a lower speed of traffic and that is why it's easier for them to spread out their goods and sell. Raw food hand carts. Raw food is vegetable and fruit and fish hand carts were found on neighborhood streets. prepared food handcarts on feeder roads, and prepared food stalls. Prepared food includes chai and snacks. So these were found on mobility corridors. Then when we talk about impact of street vending, what is the impact of street vending? Most people were unable to exactly point out whether they are good part or bad part. That is why it was further looked at through the lens of livability. Certain parameters of livability were finalized after discussions with panelists. So these 38 parameters were found out, which include feeling of cleanliness, if vendors affect cleanliness, if vendors affect access to food, if vendors affect conversion of open space. Likewise, resident opinions were taken. So here the sample was almost 450 people. Sample size was 450. Samples were taken from around 500 meters from the hotspot, because wherever vendors are present in maximum numbers, the impact would be more. 500 meters based on the walkability distance. So these were the hotspots which were studied in detail. So in Pune, Kothurud area, Mandai, Hadapsar area, Vishrantwadi, Mandai, Shandipar, Dibbewadi, Sinhagad Road and FC Road were taken as areas for detailed study. Again, maps were generated and a radius of 500 meters was mapped. You can go ahead. This is just to show. So this is Vishrambagh Vada, and an interesting study can even come up with vendors and heritage structures. So this was done for all of the 7 study areas. So this is the kind of chart that we get, that street vendors affect social connections positively. Street vendors affect cost of living positively. They keep the cost down, and we all know that. We prefer buying from the street vendors also for this particular reason. Street vendors have a positive impact on community relationships as well as security. Feeling of security is what is enhanced by the presence of street vendors. However, the negative impacts of street vendors were seen on aspects like ease of movement, which is pretty obvious, condition or the state of footpath. So that condition of footpath was also attributed to the presence of street vendors, for the reason that the number of customers they attract lead to worsening the condition of infrastructure, transport and pedestrian infrastructure. Move on. So here we find out, just go to the next slide, I'll come back to this one. So out of the 7 hotspots studied, this is the kind of vendor densities from 83 vendors per square kilometers to a vendor density of 380 vendors per square kilometers. What we noticed is that they have a kind of inverse relation. In fact, quadratic relationship was what was established. So just go back to the earlier slide. So as the number of street vendors increases, the positive impact is seen to decrease. However, here from this graph, when the number is highest, the impact is also positive. This is kind of an outlier here, because this last area was Mandai area, which is the core city area, where people have been used to this market-like situation for decades, and that is why probably their perception about positive impacts of street vendor is different. So in general, we can see that the positive impact of street vending reduces and moves towards negative impact after around 230 street vendors. Between 200 to 300 vendors, we can see that there is a decline in the positive impact and increase of negative impact of street vendors. Through this, we can come to the following conclusions. 1. Number of street vendors can be regulated to 200 vendors per square kilometers to 90 square. So wherever there are no vendors present or in the outskirts of the areas, licenses or registration of street vendors can be more for these areas, and we can have policies that regulate the number to 250 vendors per square kilometers. Considering that average space required is 2.7 square kilometers per vendor, we would have to make a provision of 675 square meters of space per square kilometer of Pune city for the vendors. In zoning policies, we have to focus on feeder roads that pass through mixed land use and commercial land use areas. This is where exclusively micro level policies like incorporating street vendors in private setbacks, positioning of compound walls can be looked at. we all know this accessibility versus mobility matrix of road hierarchy. So here I would, the way in which the street vendors are performing, minor and major streets should, other, okay. I think the voice is much more clear now. So the major or the minor collector streets have the important function apart from mobility, which includes functions of service and social functions of the street. So these days a lot of literature is focused on the social functions of the street, and that is why priority should be given for these other activities in local streets as well as collector streets. So just to summarize this, these are the different types of vendors, the land use, the road network, the type of road and the width of the road, where the vendors vendor location is feasible, most feasible. So this kind of summarizes the spatial relationships of vendors. Obviously not all factors of livability are factors that are affected by vendors. However, like shown in that spider diagram, few of the factors were positively affected and some were negatively affected. I would like to thank all these people who have also contributed to my study, and I would like to end the discussion here and open question answers. incentivizing in form of property tax. Okay, vendors at a macro level, they choose their locations with respect to urban elements, even like compound wall. So if you erect a compound wall, that forms a set wall for that particular vendor to enter. So restricting or providing for these kind of structures with respect to the commercial and mixed land use properties, especially for mixed land use and commercial properties, would take care of the vendors there. In fact, while coming also, there are so many shopkeepers who are having these kind of arrangements informal, but with a formal aspect or an angle to it and incentivizing it. The number of vendors which are right on the footpath and urban planners to create space on the already congested road, it's impossible. So some of the vendor numbers can be accommodated in these spaces. Yes, so that is how my study would help in formulating or making, giving a base to these guidelines. So I have talked about number of vendors to be restricted to around 250 vendors per square kilometers. So we can ensure in the development rules for these particular vendors that licensing or registration of vendors beyond this number, they would have to shift to other areas of the city, which, that is how congestion can be controlled. And street vendor policy does talk about regulating. It does not only talk about protection of their livelihood. So when we say regulating, we have to seek that balance between harvesting the positive impact. As मला भाजी आणायला street vendor कडे, मी mostly street vendor कडे जाते. Rather in my study, 71 to 72% of the population buy from street vendors more than once a week. So that means they are necessary elements as well. So that is how we can work out the development control rules. Regulating the number and focusing on areas where they prefer to wait, and then managing only those areas instead of creating areas all over the city which they will ultimately not use, which is happening right now. A lot of relocation efforts have been done. Even on सिंहगड रोड कुठल्या तरी नाल्याच्या ओढ्याच्या बाजूला जागा मार्क करून देतात, इकडे तुम्ही बसा, इकडे तुम्ही बसा doesn't work out like that. That is why understanding this intrinsic logic with which they place themselves, जिथे त्यांचा पण धंदा होणार, and then we know that this 675 square meter of space has to be allocated and focused on in these pockets. त्या pockets मध्येच त्या स्पेसची सोय करायची. हे प्लॅनर्स म्हणजे आपल्यासाठी इम्पॉर्टंट आहे. Sorry. Yeah.
After that, when you see that okay, ठीक है, बंदूक आपको बोलता है कि पोजीशन में आगे जाए, तो उसके बंदूक चलेगा, ये नहीं ऊपर you don't know where to look.
But this is what PLs are there. So we
can't certified in advance.
Yes. So this is why we have studied.
This policy, how to rotate it to the development and
So I think it is going to be through the PLU where 12 meter and wide other 12 meter wide roads are allowed mixed land use. So when you allow mixed land use, you have to have a conditioning where a certain amount of setback would be reserved for these informal activities. That is the only way in which we can address. The other point of view to this particular solution is that ultimately they lay claim to that particular solution. Yes. As far as possible, and creation of vendor spaces within the parking areas of the street. That is, this is the two-pronged, actual physically possible solutions that I have come up with. So parking requirement is also something that has to be taken. Streets are there, but they are not there for parking. Parking is not for number of so that is where we can have a sort of compromise between vendors, because we can't do either of them. All so that is like prioritizing the space. We have to limit and we have to manage in terms of so that is why your earlier question as to we have to plan for the future. So by studying the existing situation and understanding how they locate themselves, we can better plan for them in future, identifying the mixed land use zones that might come up and providing the streets for these particular vendors, envisioning that
Metric.
Authors of street vendors.
मिलते इथं दाखव. चार्ज होते ना बघ.
If they are in vibrant operate in planning process, street vendors or hawkers, are they desired phenomenon? They are not desired phenomenon, or they are byproduct of the urbanization process. That we need to understand. If you understand that they are byproduct of the urbanization process, and you are also accepting that they are part and parcel of our lifestyle, then we need to consider them in the planning. Then to have a corrective measures in the form of this policy, that policy, and what has to go into the picture. They have to guide on the plan and take the environmental planning should have solution for their picture. We are accepting that they are the part of the lifestyle in culture. So while coming with such kind of a provision in the plan itself, that there should not be kind of an again issues to accommodate them, adjust them, earmark the places, accommodate in the parking places on all of the street issues that. We are going to plan for the street or the parking area or footpath considering the accommodation of the hawkers. They are undesired and are not expected to be there. But there is no formal solution available in the plan process. So they are going to occupy that kind of spaces which are available in the urban context. So what we need to do, we need to understand if they are part of the lifestyle of Indian culture, the plan has to plan in such a way that they should be placed to accommodate them. Problem is as the increasing in terms of urbanization, both the social issues in terms of the street hawkers and the slum, they are increasing. As the urbanization is increasing, population of cities are increasing, your slum population and hawkers numbers are also increasing with that proportion. In spite of the planning, what some are trying to say that if you plan for Pune city, you have first development plan, second, third, fourth development plan, you have plan in place in a plan manner since last 30, 46 years. And in spite of that, your population in terms of slum and numbers in terms of street hawkers are increasing. So we are planning, when we are getting planning somewhere, our planning has to address this kind of issues. These slum population or slum proliferation or increasing street vendors or hawkers, desired phenomena, they are the byproduct urbanization process. So planning has to take into consideration some kind of other mechanism so that they can be accommodated.
And by study, the only reason I did the study is to give some space for the city managers to come up with some guidelines. What happens usually?
You are talking about curative perspective. We being thinking about the inclusive perspective.
Inclusive perspective would be planning for us for the space for street vendors in these particular zones in the upcoming areas. Whenever there is an extension or happening of areas around Pune city, here the number of street vendors is much less than the core city, but they would come up in some days, and similarly, the further the process. So wherever feeder roads are there, wherever mixed land is going to come up, that is.
You are not understanding the problem. Problem is like this. As you rightly said, their income is very from people critical. Even if coming up with a formal business, it won't be possible for them economically to occupy them. So you have to come up with such kind of a mechanism. You are going to give them formal business, but within an affordable vision. That comfort is to be given.
It is multifaceted. But it's about trying to break it down into something where solutions can come. So that is the purpose of the study. Break it down somewhere. नंबर रेस्ट्रिक्ट केले पाहिजे. कशा, किती, हे कुणीच बोलत नाही किंवा त्यांना स्पेस दिली पाहिजे. कशी मार्केट नाही वर्क होत. कितीतरी ओटा मार्केट आपल्या इथे रिकामे पडले.
बेसिक प्रॉब्लेम
कारण त्यांचा लिनियरच बिझनेस आहे.
एन्करेजमेंट रोडवर करतात, ओटा मार्केटला जायला तयार होते.
कारण त्यांना धंदा काही मिळत नाही. सो लिनियर फॉर्म मध्येच मार्केट हे आपण प्लॅन केलं पाहिजे. कितीतरी ओटा मार्केट but that is but we do know कि restrict कसं we do have some then we can
ते जात का नाही, लोक तिथे परचेस करतात. लोकांनी मोठा मार्केटला गेलं तिथे बसू दिलं नाही तर आपण करतात.
ओटा मार्केट सर्व्हिसेस जास्त म्हणजे जितके स्ट्रीट वेंडर्स इंटरॅक्ट केले
लायसन जे आहे एक लायसनची किंमत 4 लाख
आणि ते सबलेट केले
जाते, परवडू शकत
लायसन
म्हणून ते रस्त्यावर हे त्याला लायसन परवडत नाही म्हणून लोकल कॉर्पोरेटच्या
पण माझा जर विचार केला की मला घाई ऑफिसमधनं घरी जाताना मला भाजी घ्यायची, मला त्याच्यासाठी ट्रिप नाही करायची वेगळी, तर रस्त्याच्या कडेला जो बसलाय त्याला मी प्रेफरन्स देणार आता तर मी पाणी आणि
तेच तिथेच ते त्याला बसून द्यायला नाही पाहिजे.
पण तिथेच त्यांची नीड क्रिएट होते, त्यांची नीड तिथेच तर क्रिएट होते. Yeah.
Your study is very good in terms of analysis. Then you have also analyzed what area, what discussion questions of your policy. How are we doing the physical planning for new seconds?
We are not doing the planning for street vendors. That is the problem. पण त्यांना अकाउंट नाही झालं अजून. Yes, it's started by the market.
And of course, affordability is there. There is zero affordability as far as the vendor is concerned. But there is a huge big cost involved. So they are occupying the space. Therefore, I think some kind of solution must also emerge.
It offsets the social cost, that social benefits that it. If they are the only ones there, love actually buy this. So one thing is that I want to point out is that street vendors are here to stay. It's a phenomenon that is, not temporary anymore, more of a stationary nature, and that is why we as planners have to come up with certain solutions. And as far as my study is concerned, Utta markets did not seem a very feasible solution. So one, I had gone for presenting the same study in Colombo, Sri Lanka, a few years back. Sri Lanka, Colombo मध्ये street vendors नाही. It's a third world country like us, developing economy.
रोड लहान आहे, रोड तेवढे लहान आहे.
रोड लहान नाही Sri Lanka.
ट्रॅफिक जाम होते.
Colombo is the capital. त्यामुळे तिथे it's properly planned. Most of the city area. The issue is that one fine day they came up with a policy where they banned street vendors, banned in such a strong manner की एकच काहीतरी त्यांचा बीचचा पट्टा आहे जिथे ते वेंडर्स फक्त संध्याकाळी वेंड करतात. आपल्या इथे प्रॉब्लेम असा आहे की प्रायमरी ऑक्युपेशन स्ट्रीट वेंडिंग आहे. 11 तास ती लोक बसतात, याचा अर्थ सेकंडरी नाही. बँकॉकचं पण लोक उदाहरण देतात. बँकॉकमध्ये ते ओरिजिनल फार्मर्स आहेत आणि साईड बिझनेस करून ते वेंड करतात. सो हे सेकंडरी सोर्स आणि प्रायमरी सोर्स मधला पण कॉन्फ्लिक्ट आहे. आपल्याकडे हाच प्रायमरी सोर्स आहे ज्याच्यात एक स्ट्रीट वेंडर नाही तर त्याची फॅमिली इन्व्हॉल्ड असते. त्याची बायको काय प्रिपेअर करून दे, मुलगा संध्याकाळी बसेल, असं करून ते 11 तास रस्त्यावर असतात. तर हे कुठल्या दृष्टीने टेम्पररी नाहीच होत. सो जेव्हा कोलंबोमध्ये गेले की तुमच्या इथे स्ट्रीट वेंडर्स कसे नाहीत, मी हा क्वेश्चन विचार आधी तर त्यांनी मला प्रश्न विचारला की हे फॉर्मल इन्फॉर्मल तुम्ही त्यांच्यासाठी प्लॅन करता म्हणजे तुम्ही फॉर्मल करतो. सो यू आर फॉर्मलायझिंग अन इन्फॉर्मल ॲक्टिव्हिटी. व्हॉट इज द पॉईंट ऑफ दिस वॉज द क्वेश्चन दॅट दे आस्क्ड. So it is not about formalizing, it is just management or regulation of that informal activity is how I look at. तेव्हा मला प्रश्नाचं उत्तर नव्हतं देता आलं. I had just started with my study and it sort of was like, why do you want to formalize an informal activity, because those solutions kind of never come. But like some SRS schemes are working, फोकसिंग त्यांच्या नीडप्रमाणे जर प्लॅन केलं तर ते कदाचित जास्त सक्सेसफुल होईल. आणि त्याच्यासाठी हा सगळा स्टडी टू एक्झॅक्टली पॉईंट ऑफ एरियाज विच नीड अटेन्शन इन टर्म्स ऑफ सो सगळे आजकाल स्ट्रॉंग नाही होणार. मी पण आपल्या काही प्रश्नांसाठी सेटबॅकमध्ये पण आपण म्हणायला सोपं आहे की त्यांना अकोमोडेट करा. त्याच्यात बाकीचे इश्यूज खूप आहेत जसं क्लेमिंग ऑफ दॅट स्पेस किंवा सो हे सगळे सॉर्ट आउट करायला प्रॉब्ली अजून एक सेपरेट लागेल. दिस इज जस्ट टू गिव्ह पॉइंटर्स की रिस्ट्रिक्ट करा नंबर्स तर किती मी करा रिस्ट्रिक्ट, असं काहीतरी एक बॉलपार्क फिगर कुठून तरी आली पाहिजे. जसं अर्बन डेन्सिटीला काहीतरी फिगर्स आहे तसं स्ट्रीट वेंडर्सला कुठेच फिगर्स मिळत नव्हते. सो दॅट इज वाय गुड स्टार्ट. Design solutions.
Yeah, one of the
Talking with respect to social, special and economic inclusions. So she is asking what is that actually economic inclusion? Can you throw light with respect to that? Yes. She would like to know the details, but see what the question is. A lot of studies focus on spatial and social inclusions, but I am having a little difficulty on the aspect of economic inclusion. Can you please throw some light on it? Can you focus on an actual economic inclusion means what?
Okay.
Suppose you are a student.
Yes. So economic inclusion basically comes with the constitutional article 19G1, which talks that every individual is free to choose his or her occupation, his or her earning source, and that is how the street vending, that is the basis on which they actually acknowledge the presence of street vending because of this particular article. So economic inclusion is also about giving opportunities for everyone. I hope I'm audible to the people who are online now. So economic inclusion, spatial inclusion and social inclusion. When we talk about inclusion, it basically means providing opportunities for the people, spatially, socially and economically. So economic inclusion actually is mentioned in our constitution in Article 19G1, which talks about the freedom to choose your own occupation. And that is the basis on which the Street Vendor Act was built. So economic inclusion is giving equal opportunities, equal economic opportunities for the people for their economic growth. That is what economic inclusion term means. I hope Pranjal, I have explained the question that you had.
It's much effective because all the various partners they know that when I say like this is there and we need to fix a time and it's effective spaces provided. It's just like it's once a week.
So yes, temporal solutions are also mentioned, and a lot of temporal solutions have been practiced. So Saurabh was talking about having a vendor market once a week. Saurabh, what will they do for 6 days of the week other than that?
Yeah, that's there.
So that market is completely different. The study, like sir also pointed out here, there are kinds of street vendor markets. One is a street vendor market like Fashion Street, where the street vendors are accommodated in a certain area. Okay. In Pune, Fashion Street is like that. In Mumbai, the Fashion Street is linear. So something like Hong Kong Lake, where there is one space where the street vendors congregate. The other is a street linear market where the street vendors are along the road, and then the third type is the weekly market. So my study won't be focusing on weekly market because weekly market is of vendors who are farmers essentially, and street vending is just an outlet for them. So this kind of activities, in this case even temporal time sharing, मंगळवारी इकडे बस, सोमवारी इकडे बस असं वर्क होत नाही, कारण एक स्ट्रीट वेंडरचा कस्टमर बेस ठरलेला असतो, आपण त्या स्ट्रीट वेंडरकडे जातो. So temporal solutions according to my study may not be feasible.
Now my question is, if we provide solutions, so don't you think that street vendor as an occupation will increase?
Yes, that's a good question. Street vendor as an occupation will increase if a proper space is provided. But that is why I have talked about having a cap on the numbers to 250 in a particular area. See, Street Vendor Act talks about not putting a cap on the numbers at all. In fact, I'll tell you something else. मी जेव्हा स्टडी करत होते तेव्हा मला पण वाटलं की यार आपण फॉर्मलायझेशन हे करतोय सगळं ठीक आहे,
but they actually have their own intrinsic way of controlling the number. So whenever a new street vendor wants to enter that area, they are already restricted by the by the vendors who are present there earlier, because that is going to affect their business. So if you see at the demography of vendors, most of the street vendors are between the age group of 41 and 50 and have been in street vending for more than 10 years. Young street vendors, young ones are usually discouraged, especially core areas where the business is high. The street vendors within themselves restrict the number.
But again, you have linked the number of vendors with the population in the particular area.
I have linked it with the impact on livability and not.
Yeah, but the number is linked with the 2% of
How much
population. Right. Again, population is going to increase.
70% more than illegal.
And population is going to increase day by day. And again, we are increasing the FSI.
Right.
So again, you have to increase the number of vendors.
So I have not linked it with the population. I have linked it with the perception or the impact of the vendors on the population. So livability impact she relates to, it does not relate to the density anyway. Because I tell you what, density won't work because there are commuters who pass through the areas who are also the customers of the street vendors and not only the population residing in that area. That is why a population density based approach will not work in deciding the numbers.
So what is your solution?
Solution is that an arbitrary number.
We can't have a solution.
Solution would be
That is the planning the solution.
नाही. Solutionसाठी बेस्ट गाईडलाईन्स काही आहेत त्या देऊ शकतो. बट कमिंग अप विथ अ प्रॉपर सोल्युशन की पुणे सिटीमध्ये इथे जागा पाहिजे. ते पॉसिबल आहे बाय टू अ लँड सुटेबिलिटी इन द पॅरामीटर्स दॅट आय हॅव डिस्कस. म्हणजे फीडर रोड्स कुठे आहे, मिक्स लँड यूज कुठे आहे, नंबर कुठे कमी जास्त आहे. सो ह्या सगळ्या पॅरामीटर्स आपण पॉईंट आउटही करू शकतो की इथे इंटरव्हेन्शन हवं.
Like if we restrict the particular number, suppose, then won't it be formalized much if it won't be
Regulating, not formalizing. When we talk about formalizing, issues of taxes and payments also come into picture. So it is just about regulating that. Very simple and easy to operate.
What about widening of streets? As the roads are getting wider day by day, the space available for the vendors is reducing. So that is a point. Also, another question is that the vehicular traffic is increasing, as we all know, down the line along these following years. So, are you of the opinion on the board that we must restrict vehicular traffic and completely pedestrianize some streets so that, as we see, as you gave the example of
No, I am not of that opinion of pedestrianizing the street. It does not work. For street vendors also, they won't sit on only pedestrian streets because then the consumer number or the customer number is limited in that.
Because ma'am, the number of customers who are visiting those vendors are causing vehicular traffic congestion and other problems.
Absolutely against pedestrianizing the streets just for the sake of street vendors. That is not what I was implying. It is accommodating within the street space itself. And widening of roads when it's happening, I think street vendors are getting more chance. To ITI road outside pilot up, wider the street, wider the footpath, and smart cities च्या अंडर खूप footpath झाले आणि all are occupied by vendors. The cycle tracks are occupied. Sinhagad road is a classic example. One more example where road widening did take place, but it led to an increase in space for the street vendors also. So street vendor space is not reducing. The more you widen, the more the street vendors will be. Vishal Road. Yeah.
What is the future? What is the future of street vendors? Because now the malls which are selling even cheaper than the vendors on the street. So what is the future? What do you see in 20 years, 30 years from now?
A lot of literature pointed out to the fact that street vendors might be an obsolete occupation. This was predicted so many years back, it still has not happened. So we ourselves, even though the malls are competing, the smaller shops are competing with the street vendors. Street vending is here to stay, and not only for the developing countries, the same phenomena is there. In fact, the developed countries are applying the positive, harnessing the positive parts of street vending in a very different way. but promoting street vendors in certain houses. So I don't think we should take a step back.
Right, we will have a 5-minute break for tea and then we will start again.
These are the contents which will be going through overall presentation. Simply, the flood is a natural event where the land which is not usually inundated gets submerged underwater, and this may, because of any type of flooding, riverine flooding, flash flooding, or the coastal flooding. According to the National Disaster Management Authority, around 12% of the India's land, that is around 5,000 urban local bodies, are prone to flooding. And in 2019, we know that the 13th state got affected because of the flood, as there was an increase of 6.5% of average annual rainfall. Next. So why these floods occur? There are many reasons. There could be direct or indirect factors, considering the global climate changes, which increase in the temperature and increase in precipitation. Urbanization, obviously, unplanned development or increase stress on the infrastructure development leading to unplanned growth. Topography of the area. Topography of the area, improper transportation networks or increase in impervious surfaces, improper adequate drainage system and improper waste management. So why urban areas only, how urban areas are more prone to flooding? Because of the urban heat island effects, which because of the high impervious shell, which leads to the high runoff and reduced infiltration that causes the higher flood peaks, even if the rain is for the shorter duration. And along with because of the presence of high population density and infrastructure, urban areas become more prone to flooding and more destruction occurs. In this image, we can see that how the runoff is been increasing as there is an increase in the impervious surfaces. To understand better, this is the case study of Oshivara Basin in Mumbai, where it was found out that over a period of 1966 to 2001, there was increase of 43% of the built-up area, and within next 8 years, the 30% increase was in the impervious surfaces was found, and therefore the peak runoff and peak runoff volume varied by 10.4% to 12%. Next. So what can be done to tackle such problems is the flood risk management and the flood risk assessment. So what is a flood risk? So when we say that there is a flood hazard at a specific location, and if there is a presence of any asset, people or infrastructure, then the area becomes more risky and the flood risk increases. So the flood risk assessment, it is the mechanism where we find out the sources of the flooding from all the reasons for the flooding from all the sources, and the flood mitigation measure and what could be done in case of the before and after situations. So it helps us to obtain a flood hazard map which gives us a overall picture, which is the high risk zone, medium risk zone or below risk zone, and we can plan accordingly in our development plan and land use planning regulations. So this was the methodology which I followed during my master's thesis, where the literature was done to obtain what could be the methods to analyze the flood risk locations, and what could be the parameters which increases the vulnerability of the flood risk areas. Then the identification of the parameters using the expert opinion, then the data collection which included primary and secondary data collection, preparation of the GIS database, and the analysis. So Pune Municipal Corporation boundary for Pune Municipal Corporation was taken for the study. The total length of Mura and Mutha river traversing through the city are 44 kilometers, and water is discharged from Khadakbasla Dam at 97,000 cusecs capacity. However, during the monsoon season, even at a 50,000 cusecs, the flood situation occurs, and the areas which are immediately along the river gets flooded. So we know that in 2019, the heavy rain of 4 to 5 hours caused a flash flooding in Pune city because the rainfall recorded was 16 centimeters, which was the highest in last decade. So how can we use GIS for this flood risk assessment? Because nowadays we know that remote sensing data are getting easily available to us through the various open sources. It helps us in
which is useful in planning the risk mapping. So what it does, it takes topographical features of the city, creates a layers of it, combine it together with weighted overlay analysis, and gives us a specific map which shows us which are the areas at a higher risk or which are at a lower risk. Next. So this is the brief of the GIS methodology which we can use for the analysis, where we collect the parameters, then extract the parameters from the remote sensing images such as DEM imagery, landscape imagery. Then we assign the weightages. For that, analytical hierarchy process has been used, and the flood risk map is ready. So when I studied many of the literatures, these were the common parameters which were found, which are the flood causing parameters. Means even though there could be another reason, these are the parameters which are most common, which will cause increased vulnerability of the cities. So this is the land cover, land use, surface elevation, slope, drainage density, and the distance from the river channels. So for the study, I had selected these 5 parameters: elevation, land cover, slope, distance from main channel, and the drainage density. The drainage density here refers to the natural drainage density, means presence of the streams. I haven't considered the soil because in case of the urban context, the impervious surfaces, open land, barren land, and presence of such things causes more impact on the occurrence of the flood. So this is the table which shows how I collected the data from which resources. For example, the land cover, stream network, surface elevation, and slope were collected from the satellite imagery, DEM imagery, which we usually get from the USGS websites or the Google website. Then the administrative boundaries from the development plan, the population data from the census data, and the other expert opinion surveys to the primary data collection. So this was the methodology which is required for the GIS analysis, where these 5 parameters were superimposed in the GIS database layers, and the AHP was performed using the opinions of the expert, where they were asked to rate the parameters on the scale of 0 to 9 based on how much it impacts the occurrence of the flood. Next. So first parameter is the elevation. As we know that the low-lying areas get submerged quickly, so we can see that the northern and the southwest portion of the city has a higher elevation than that of the lower elevation. This is also because of the presence of the river in this portion. Next. This is the slope analysis. The slope analysis is the same. As we can see that 3 to 8 degrees of the slope is maximum found in the Pune city, and the section shows level of the slope at each section. Next. These are the distance from the main channel and the natural drainage density. Now one can say that it is not always important that as the distance from the main channel increases, the flood reduces. But it is we need to also consider that the cumulative effect of all the 5 parameters. Like here I have mapped map the areas at every 500 meters of interval, and accordingly the weightages are given. Similarly, the drainage density were mapped using GIS. Next. This is the land use and land cover, which was done using 10-meter resolution imagery. And this gives us the bifurcation in built-up area, water bodies, barren land, and the vegetative. So we can see that the core part of the city and the northern part of the city is having a high concentration of the built-up area, followed by the barren land vegetation. Next. So now we have obtained all the parameters. Now we have to give them a weightages based on how they impact the occurrence of the flood. So for that, the experts were concerned from the various departments such as drainage department, flood disaster cell of the Pune city, then the people who have already worked on the flood risk assessment and riverfront development. This was the questionnaire they were given, and they were asked to rate as in pairwise combinations where they feel that in respect of the surface elevation, how much land cover affect that area. Next. And after getting all these formulas, we can see according to the experts, that 30% of the weightage has been given to the land cover, then followed by slope elevation and the drainage density. Now here one can also say that the selection of the parameter may influence the obtainance of the map. However, the basis of the parameters for the specificity may not change rather than having the different parameters. So this was the final map which was obtained after performing the GIS analysis. The area in the blue line shows the high risk area, then the green is the moderate risk area, and then the low risk area. The flood hazard index was obtained through the AHP analysis and next. So this was the ward-wise bifurcation, that how much population in each ward is getting affected or which is vulnerable to the flooding. So we can see that the ward number 12, 25, 18, 16, it means every ward is at a risk, but the level is different. So this is the slope elevation analysis done at the various section of the high flood risk zone. So this just shows the horizontal extent, means we can see the blue line is the river extent and the red line is the horizontal extent, so that the structures which are coming under this red line will be at a higher risk. Next. Now to understand the characteristic in detail of the every flood risk, every high risk zone and the moderate risk zone, I have gone through the detailed land use mapping of the ward number 15, which is under the high risk area. From here we can see that the population is 74,000 and the most prominent land use is the mixed land use, and the 14% for public and semi-public. And however, also from the Google Earth imagery we can see that most of the area is covered through the impervious surface. Then the building density is 2000 buildings per square kilometer, and the land use land cover analysis contribution of impervious surfaces is very high. However, the green cover was seen was very less. Next. Now looking at a low risk area, it is ward number 14. The area is 1.8 square kilometer and the population is only 18,000 square meter. Also the 39% is prominently the residential area. Now here we can see that the roads are also wider. The channelization has been done along the rivers, and presence of the natural drains and the drainage system is also present. Now what cities need to do to tackle the problem of this flooding, frequent flooding during the monsoon. So first, city need to develop a flood risk assessment map, which shows us each ULB can have such kind of a map where they can make a DCPI regulations in compliance with this high risk zone or moderate risk zones. Also, the infrastructure choices which can be made according to these risk zones. The rehabilitation and retrofitting in case of the high risk area, and improving the drainage and the sanitation system. Next. So the measures in case of the special planning, the measures can be done at two levels. First is the land use and the building level. In case of the land use, we prohibit the land use, limit the density, and exclude hazardous or hazardous or the critical land uses in the high risk areas. Move them to the low risk areas. And in building level, the elevation of the plinth, elevation of the first story of the building, and the flood proofing or the retrofitting of existing infrastructure can be one of the measures. Next. So the recommendations, next please. Now according to the NDMA authority, they have decided the priorities of the building. For example, priority 1 buildings include the public utilities, hospitals, public, semi-public, railway station, major important roads of the city. Then the priority 2 building includes the government institution, offices, or the residential areas of the building. And the priority 3 buildings are the land uses are the parks, playgrounds, or the vegetable markets or infrastructure such as playgrounds. So which will not get affected immediately if the flood occurs. Now we can allot these kind of the priority buildings as per the respective risk zones. For example, now this type of the risk zoning may not be totally applicable to the existing built-up or brownfield development. However, in case of the brownfield development, we may promote the use of the ground, we may promote the functional changes of the ground floor use. For example, in case of the ground floor, we may permit to have the open areas or the parking areas, obviously, which are lesser affected than that of the high risk. So this is the pictorial presentation. Like according to the DCPR guidelines, blue line and flood line are marked based on the probability of occurrence of the flood, like 1 in 50, 25 years and 1 in 100 years. So after the river bed, minimum 15 meters has to be kept as a green belt. Then only multi-stories of the ground floor storage, which this is the high risk zone. So only multi-story or no ground floor can be considered in this high risk zones. Or in case of the moderate risk zones, the priority 2 buildings can be considered, and in case of the low risk zone, priority 1 buildings can be located.
Thank you, Shivangi. We will take our questions. Got the certificate also. Another student was there who got the first prize also, the same topic, but he worked on the micro level. Okay. So next one is about actually Mridula just started her work 6 months back, and she is working on how to take a decision based on which parameter. So urban density, again, of course, we are again relating to quality of life or livability, because that is the main purpose. So she wanted to show something, whatever she done, and then she wanted to ask you to actually rate the things. So she will distribute.
Hello. Good afternoon everyone. I am Rudula and currently I am doing my PhD at COEP. I started PhD from October 2021, so it's just 6 months. So I'd like to first brief about my topic. As you can see, the topic is investigating influence of urban density on livability in urban areas. And my guide is Professor Pratap Rawal. Yes, so talking about my research topic, due to urbanization, there is huge demand of new buildings, infrastructure that needs to be provided. So for that, there is rapid development that's happening. So getting the cities in right terms of densities often seem to be challenging. And also assessing livability within these new built environments is also difficult. So identifying the parameters with respect to density that actually contribute to enhancing livability is important to understand. And also apart from that, the local and regional planning process, how it is considering livability and density in terms of policy making needs to be understood. So the major underlying research questions which lead to this research are: what are the measures of urban density considered while planning any particular area? Are these right adequate measures for measuring density, or is there any other form that needs to be considered? Then what are the driving forces for increase or decrease of density in any particular area? Does urban density have any impact on livability? If it does, then what kind of density would be required for achieving better livability? So moving towards what is urban density, the literature states that it is the ratio of total number of inhabitants living within a well-defined footprint of a city to the total area of this footprint. It is also expressed as the number of people inhabiting in a given urbanized area. So these are the definitions listed through literature. So understanding urban density at global and Indian level. At global level, Asian cities which have densities around 10,000 people per square kilometers, we often see high-rise apartments and towers. The density also goes up to 20,000 people per square kilometers in metro cities like Mumbai, Hong Kong. European cities which follow the European perimeter block model tend to have densities around 3,000 to 6,000 people per square kilometers. Looking at US, Canadian and Australian cities, they have densities pretty low, that is around 1,000 to 2,500 people per square kilometers. Below that we can see the cities and their densities taken from census 2001 and 2011 with respect to Indian cities. So next, moving towards types of densities. Density according to the literature is composed of physical density and perceived density. So it is a combination of both. Physical density talks about the actual measuring factors which can be counted, while perceived density is more of individual factors and socioeconomic factors that are taken into consideration. So further moving, what are the types of physical density? So these are all 12 different types of densities that are listed through literature. The highlighted ones, the population density and building densities are densities which we are familiar with and which are usually used in the planning processes. According to URTPFI guidelines, density surveys are taken into consideration for understanding the relationship between built-up area and population densities. They are taken in two ways, which is the residential surveys, which consist of accommodation density, occupancy rate, and population density, while non-residential focus on all other uses other than residential, to understand the infrastructure and how it works. Limitations of this physical density. Population density is measured in people per hectare according to the census data, but it keeps fluctuating over time in functions. So cannot be accurate. It cannot be the accurate measure of density. While building density is measured for the ratio of floor to land area, which is counted through FSI and FARs, but it is the major limiting the development, just the development. So that cannot be the solely measure of it. And also we have dwelling units per unit area, which focuses on number of units but not the actual size of each unit. So this is the perceived density. Perceived density is the individual perception of density. So it is usually affected by, it affects the behavioral and emotional quotient of people. And it is influenced by a number of factors like temporal aspects of activities, social, cultural nature, experiences of individuals, etc. In planning process in India, the FSI is usually used for regulating density. And there are multiple views of urban density that need to be taken into consideration at various levels. And there are various driving forces for this density. Literature focuses on urban densification and its driving forces. So further, these are the most cited drivers of density which have been broadly classified into 5 types, 5 factors. So number 1 is land use factor, demographic factors, economic factors, planning policy factors, and sustainability energy efficiency factors. So land use factors is the distance from particular place to the hospitals, schools, workplaces, transit networks, etc. Then the next factor is demographic factors, which is, we all know that there is migration. So the urban population grows, which leads to increased urban population density, which leads to unsustainable sprawling and further changing the residential preferences of people. Then economic factors due to the fluctuating land values, then developers trying to build it with greater capital to land ratios. Then further higher prices lead to higher floor space area rates, further leading to people tending to live in smaller houses in taller towers. Then next is planning policy. Planning policy is the zoning regulations, the height restrictions, whatever are imposed. They might also cause increase or decrease in density of particular areas. Then further is sustainability and energy efficiency. For lowering energy consumption or having efficient energy consumption, there are different ways in which high density can be promoted or probably low density can be promoted. So even that can impact urban density. So the questionnaire will be circulated. So this is the first part of the questionnaire, in which all these 5 factors which were explained right now, there is a 7-point Likert scale ranging from very unlikely to very likely. So according to you, how important or how likely you find that factor to impact increase or decrease of urban density could be mapped by you, so that will help me to understand what and how it is perceived by people. So This for land use factors, you can find the little explanation in case you skipped anything. There is explanation in brackets for each of the factors. So land use factor, demographic factors, economic factors, planning policy factors, and sustainability energy efficiency factors. I hope everybody has received the questionnaires. Yes, so in the section 1 we have drivers of density, which I have right now talked about. So in the start is the personal information that needs to be filled, that will be strictly for academic purpose. And then moving towards drivers of density, you have to tick mark the right numbers. There are blocks with 1 to 7 ratings given. So you have to just tick mark the most likely thing you feel. 1 is very unlikely. You will find it in the questionnaire. 1 is very unlikely, 2 is unlikely, 3 is somewhat unlikely, 4th is neutral, which is neither likely nor unlikely, 5th one is somewhat likely, 6th likely, and 7th very likely. Yes. Moving towards livability, I'll first explain it and then probably you can take time to fill. So moving towards livability, there is no proper definition of livability, hence it is understood and perceived in different ways, and it can be applied in different ways. In 1961, the famous urbanist Jane Jacobs expressed people's livability standard had 3 parameters to it. 1 was satisfactory access to community facilities, 2nd, adequate provision of essential services, and amenities within walking distances. And often there is confusion about what is quality of life and livability. Both terms are hand in hand, but livability is a term which focuses more on community services and amenities, while quality of life is a term which focuses on how these amenities shape and benefit the humans from it, and how the humans experience it. So, quality of life parameters we all are familiar with, which is health, then security, lot of tangible and intangible factors. While livability you can see in the leftmost corner, which is the umbrella of all quality of life and all physical parameters. So livability is an umbrella which covers all of these aspects, right from quality of life to all physical measures. So moving towards assessing livability is a subjective exercise, and everybody, based on their gender, their age, they would have different priorities and they would want different things around themselves. So here for my research I would be using the definition of livability as the quality of life experienced by the residents within a city or a region, which was given by Timmer and Seymour. There are numerous parameters in literature which emphasize on physical, social, and various economical aspects of well-being of people. So as you can see in the image, there are few tangible factors and few intangible factors. Like in the image below are the physical factors, like for kids and for their parents. They would want nursery schools, playgrounds near to them. But while the teenagers would want restaurants, cafes, etc. to be near to them. So it is matter of choice, it's matter of age group, and their demand would change. And above you can see the intangible factors, like some would want good accessibility, some would want clean air around them, some would want peace, some would want safety. So it depends. It is a subjective factor. So the second section is the questionnaire for livability. So here are the various parameters listed to literature and have been the questions have been formed according to them. So questions like availability of amenities within 300 to 800 meters. 300 to 800 meters is taken from UIDPFI guidelines. So according to that, how do you find the hospitals, institutions, local administrative offices? Does it impact you? is it the importance of it most important or extremely important? Not important to extremely important. So you have the 7 pointers to it. So accordingly, you will have to rate it. Do you find availability of that particular amenity most important or least important? So with questions like availability of amenities, then quality of these amenities, effective connectivity to these amenities, then availability of transit infrastructure within the distance of 400 meters. So 400 meters is given in URD PFI guidelines. And transit infrastructure is briefly about the rickshaw stops, the intermediate transport systems. Rickshaw stops, probably taxi spots, otherwise the bus stops, metro stations, the immediate transit network which is placed next to your house. So if it is within 400 meters, will it affect availability of that particular network? That is the question. So you have to tick mark the importance of it. Then the quality of that transit infrastructure, effective connectivity to the transit infrastructure, then availability and quality of physical infrastructure, which is the electricity supply, water supply, rainwater harvesting, wastewater recycling, etc. Will that be important for livability or not important? In presence of recreational facilities within the distance of 300 to 800 meters, recreational facilities include the parks, theatres, multi-purpose open spaces, sports facilities, etc. Later on, the sense of safety and security, safety from thefts, then road accidents, probably for people walking, the safety from road accidents, will it be important or not important for livability? Then level of noises due to crowding, traffic congestions, or probably a lot of construction works or any kind of temporary or permanent noise pollution would impact or not impact. Next, visual characters of built environment, which would include the forms of buildings, the heights of buildings, colors of buildings, the facades of buildings, or probably the textures, materials, the visual characters of the buildings will it impact. Then further is natural environmental characteristics like the presence of probably a river going along the neighborhood, or its presence of trees giving good shelter to the streets, factors like these. Then cleanliness and good maintenance of built environment, which is clean streets, then cleanliness within the streets, open spaces, amenity spaces, etc. Then the presence of various housing typologies, if it would impact, which is the presence of bungalows, high-rise or extreme low-rise buildings, if that would impact livability. And these are the references. Thank you for your patience. You will feel free to ask any queries if you have regarding the questionnaire.
Okay, we will take now all the questions. First, I will just see there are some online queries are there, so we will take that also. And I also request Meshram sir, who is online join, to say a few words about all these 3 presentations. So first, we will have what he says, and then we will take questions and answers. Meshram sir, over to you.
She has also said that the inclusion of the street vendors is required to be done at the time of the urban planning also, which according to her at present is not given that proper weightage. She has also touched upon the subject of the registration and survey of the street vendors. She has established a relationship between the characteristics of the vending, that is in terms of the physical planning, land use planning and the road network. She has also assessed the impact of the vending on the livability. However, I wonder, when the street vendors are there, during the busy hours, that is specifically when the peak hours are there, or should they be allowed or and increase the or create the jams and all these things? Second, my question would have been, second, my not a question, my point of view was that take the example of any of the city and the footpath and the cycle tracks are encroached by the vendors and then that creates a traffic congestion also, and whether that particular aspect is required to be taken into consideration. And if we don't solve that particular problem specifically during the peak hours, it really generates the traffic much more, and then it acts as a bottleneck. So that is what is required to be taken care of. Second speaker has also done an excellent presentation, that is Shivangi Amdekar. She spoke specifically on the flood risk assessment, taking the case study of the Pune, and she has used the GIS for flood risk assessment through the satellite data. She has also identified the high-risk zones, that is high-risk areas and low-risk areas also, and done the land use and land cover analysis on the basis of which she has identified this particular zone. The third presentation we have just taken place about investigating influence of the urban density on the decision making, presented by Ms. Mridula Mangalkar. Excellent presentation, and then really I enjoyed her presentation. Specifically, she spoke on the urban density. She has also discussed about the types of the density, that is physical density, and she has also touched another aspect, that is of the perceived density also. Under the physical density, she has studied the building density, and also she has studied the population density. She has also identified the drivers of the density, specifically sustainability, power, land use, demography, efficiency, etc. And again, she has also, as the earlier speakers have also done, tried to have the accessibility with the livability. She has assessed that particular livability index, also taken into consideration the density aspect. Very well presentations. Of course, let us listen to the audience or the participants what they have to say. Thank you very much for giving the opportunity. Excellent presentation by all the three presenters. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Over to you, Professor.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Online there are no any questions for these two presentations, but the issue raised by Honorable Meshram sir about peak hour problem, encroaching the the footpath and cycle tracks and all. Yeah. Unfortunately, the speaker is she has to leave early. But I could answer from my side that all issue could not be solved by just by physical planning. We need to adopt the approach of conservative surgery. So some governance part is there, management part is there, and in such cases we should not allow which are actually hampering or troubling the traffic on the mobility corridor, especially. In fact, in Isha's presentation also she tried to say about which road widths are important, and she also already answered that some of you have also asked that why not we have a pedestrianization in a particular streets and all. So, of course, in the planning we cannot have one solution fit to all. So we have to make a trade-off and come up with the context-specific solution based on the context. Like the context is defined, the city's typology, urban form, everything will come into picture. So, in a way, she tried to establish the relationship. Second, Shivangi presentation is about flood risk. How to find out the flood risk areas, and then what kind of policy for DCPR and other things are important. So, since there are no questions from online presenter, if you have anything, you can ask to both of them. They are there. Before that, I request, because these forms
you need to fill because they are very important for her to go further. So you have to just give the rating within that segment, tick marks only based on your own opinion about what is important, what is not important. And please hand over before we conclude it. But again, the questions are welcome.
Any suggestion regarding how to mitigate with the floods? What are the measures to be taken to mitigate the floods?
The main objective is to provide the risk zones and accordingly what kind of the land. Hello. Accordingly, what kind of the land use can be incorporated.
Just support her. Her study was to find out the zone and suggest policy. Your question is right, how to mitigate it. So there are both hard and soft measures are there. Of course, that is not part of her study, so she will not able to answer. But there is always, hard measure. We call it as a drainage measure, where some kind of holding ponds and all. And there are soft measures. We call it as a low impact development. So there both solutions are there, but again it is based on proper study of all the areas, whether it is Navi Mumbai or Pune and all. So as a planner for us is that how much we can reduce our damage due to the flood through the planning. So planning is zoning, DCPR. So she tried to cover it, but as you rightly pointed out that some of the measures require engineering solution and the pipeline and then all these things are important. Like in London also they have done that, and in major cities where there is a lot of urbanization.
That is also now that is a trend of compact cities. Buildings are inevitable. Or concrete roads are inevitable. Is there, you have studied any method to regarding this, how to control the flow of flood?
Right, sir. You are saying that the impervious surface is going to increase,
yes.
complexity is going to be there. But in that case, we need to focus on what kind of the flood resistant material we can use. Obviously, improving the pervious surfaces, or in case of the marginal distance of the buildings, or along the roadside having a proper drainage system that can be incorporated.
Proper drainage system will be there.
But
how we can avoid the concrete road? Because if you see the rails are there, we have to make a concrete roads. Otherwise, there will be potholes.
So in that case, sir, we need to have the depth level analysis and the runoff flow analysis, where what kind of the capacity of the drainage should be in compared to the runoff which is present on the that has to be.
And you have taken that Oshiwara study. How it concerns with the other cities? Because Bombay is different at all. Oshiwara cannot be compared with this Pune or this thing, because Bombay is with the tides and all these things. Drainage system is.
There are like types of flooding as you said. It was a riverine flood in case of the Oshiwara case. In case of the Pune city, there could be that could be only because of the presence of the built-up area, also because of the flash flooding and because of the riverine flood. That the cumulative effect can be there.
You say that it is because of that Khadagwasta dam. They are
not because of the Khadagwasta dam discharges. When the rain is at its peak, or the higher rainfall occurs for the shorter duration, the discharge capacity of the natural drains increases, but the drains cannot sustain that discharge capacity from the Khadagwasta. So major things we need to do in case of the natural drainage or having the capacity, increasing the capacity of those drains.
Hello. My question is, in your presentation you have showed like there is in high risk area you have to restrict the FSI and restrict the construction like that. But according to my knowledge, in Pune the all Gautran is situated exactly to river. If you see Narayan Pets or everything, and that is from last 100 years, not today. Now how according to how can the development going to occur there, because there is the existing tenants are there.
Yes.
They are staying from last 100 years. And how you can accommodate them? Because if they are staying near the floodline, we have to accommodate it, because the planning they shows that the residential area.
As I said in one of the slides, that in case of the ground field developments, we need to focus on the ground floor development. We cannot have the total development in ground floor. So there we can shifting of the ground floor, functional change of the ground floor can be done. For example, if there is a hospital which is very much vulnerable, that the people won't be evacuated as fast as other people. So in that case, the functional change of that land use can be done. Or the people on the...
What about the residents?
That can be shifted to the upper stories, and the proper passages from the upper stories to the evacuation can be constructed. That's what it is.
I think both the both have expressed their concern regarding the mitigation measure. How to, but one very important thing, if we maintain that flood zone as it is, and as you said in case of Mr. Kiran, we should shift the settlement as well, which is not possible at all, right? So in that case, what should be the engineering measure? Because the urban area, the lands in urban areas are having very high potential, and it is not like a rural area. So mitigation means we expect it should be in terms of some engineering measures. Not that flood lines are superimposed on the urban development plan, and we are constrained to use that and shift the high potential land to the other area, which is actually not possible at all, considering the urban land value. So in that case, can it be possible to have some mitigation measure in terms of some, as I said, in terms of holding pond, or and is there a possibility to shift the flood line towards the river side? This is the kind of mitigation measure actually which may not be practical in terms of regulation and present practice, but this is what actually could be the risk management in terms of flood control, and also the practical solution to the present situation.
I think a very valuable question in the current context, and we actually in another study we tried to sub-basin level try to do, and the mitigation measure you mentioned, we try to find out the spaces where some measure could be taken. So at that particular analysis is different analysis, which requires micro level analysis, which require a different software, water team and all. But definitely we can reduce the impact of the flood, which you said that the flood line could change. But that is all aggregate effect. Now, impervious surfaces and all, which is causing it is well known. But the thing is that we go on increasing the surfaces, and which is causing, and we are not allowing any percolation of water underground. So, for us, say DCPR, how much area should be made open within the plot is also important. Similarly, what she mentioned is that in the future, so if it is a flood risk, then some upper story ground floor keep vacant so that the flood in there, the damage will be less. So that is the meaning. But what you are talking about, the mitigation, which is engineering as well as the software. So engineering, in other words also, like in Australia also, it is engineering both annual and software. Like in one of the study, we try to simulate with the two. They is called as a rain garden, and in open spaces, how much absorption is possible, and how much flood could be reduced. So that study is also we have done in sub-basin level within the coastal area.
Another, in continuation of the same, there, if we take mitigation measure, definitely the flood lines which happens to be there in the development plan, it is likely to be shifted. Whether that will be acceptable to the authority or more probably due to the government. That is the main question.
Yeah, that is that is not in our hand. That's why I am telling you 25 years and 100 years. So 100-year flood line is marked based on some analysis and 25 years also. So recently in Pune also they tried to change the flood line also. But the problem is that by changing the flood line, immediately as a planner we allow them towards the river, the development towards the river, which is dangerous. You know, as you are saying that the land values and they are also important, but we never consider the cost of damage. You know, in 19 flood, it was a flash flood in Pune. It was not the big flood, but there was so much of damage. I think Sahkar Nagar, all the cars have gone. All cars were submerged for 2 days and they have to be scrapped. So these are all the, nobody has worked like the cost of all this impact of, you know, flood on the car. And that is why that level also we tried to study in another student. He was with her only, and he has done only for that sub-basin, and he tried to find out the causes. And then they found out that now for us is that too, what kind of, you know, impact could be lowered. What are the ways? Because we cannot demolish, we cannot say. So he came up again with some measure at the plot level, some measure at the basin level, stream. So these combination will work, not just one. One will not work like, you know, people say that end of pipe solution, put up the pipes and all. So recently the pipes are putting, but the flood is not gone. So one is that we have to respect the urban drainage system while putting the structure. That is sure, and that is not happening. So the plan has to be weighted to the urban drainage only. Natural urban drainage system has to be respected, because we are unnecessarily blocking the things and then, you know, many streams are vanishing, which is also not good. Like there are chances that you can keep the stream within the plot boundary also, and you can also construct. There are examples, but that is something at the design level, you know, those who are designing the structure, they have to take into consideration. So one solution, as you say that the administrator will have a solution that how to mitigate it. But the already aggravated problem we can reduce only, but not totally mitigate it. That's it.
मिटिगेशन म्हणजे कसं आहे की अर्बन एरियामध्ये लँड व्हॅल्यू प्रचंड आहे. म्हणजे जर फ्लड प्रोन एरिया जर रिकामा ठेवायचा म्हटलं तर ते म्हणजे प्रॅक्टिकली पॉसिबल नाही.
No, we are not thinking. We are not saying that the flood prone area to be kept vacant.
बरोबर. मग त्याच्यासाठी जर आपण रिव्हर फ्रंट डेव्हलपमेंट वर केला
So that is the concept of river front is the current context, whatever is happening is totally different. Riverfront has to take into consideration the stepwise where the percolation zones are there have to be marked and where the development should occur. What we are saying is that go up to age and construct this and then the water will flow. Ultimately, that water will go somewhere else. So that is the problem.
At the same time, ground water level ची पण capacity वाढली पाहिजे. त्यामुळे प्रत्येक ठिकाणी
So that is why the studies say that where percolation zones are there, you should allow percolation. And through the GIS analysis, we can find out the aquifer. So through the aquifer mapping, we can say that the land use control should be there. So that the aquifer. Now, you see Pune, the groundwater table has gone down because there is no percolation, much percolation. So whole underground water cycle is disturbed. So that part, natural cycle, we cannot just say that okay, leave it. So ultimately, at the 11th hour, we go only for underground. So all bore wells and all that. So borewell in my area, which is just I think 80 or 80 meters from the river line, dry. Why it is dry? Because the whole percolation system is gone. Because even in my plot, age to age concreting has done by builders. So there is no chance to percolate.
Rainwater harvesting system.
Yeah, but rainwater harvesting system, there are practical problems also. that that is the main thing, sir. In practically, all these stormwater drainage does not work because the practical problem is that if you look at that Jangli Maharaj Road, just next to river, but as soon as the half an hour flood every day, they have 500 meter two lines going. It doesn't take care because there is a maintenance issue. Every morning if you go around Pune city, all sweeping is dropped into the stormwater and they go on continuously flying. So its capacity is also big. So these are the problems where only planning solution is not going to work. There is also maintenance part and the governance part that has to be taken care of.
Governance part is not important.
That is governance. The management is the governance. How they are cleaning, where they are putting.
But they are making the road on the river. They are making the metro in also river.
That is true. That is the problem. So while we are compromising our open spaces, so the river as an open space is gone. So if you put more and more things in the river, it will going to flood it. So now the pillar has come. They already studied. CWPRS has done the study. How much flood will occur? There are proper way of doing that, and we are waiting now. All the pillars are there. How the flood will occur? Because definitely it has reduced the capacity of the flood. No, not possible. It will flood more area in the checkpoint.
प्रत्येक सिटीला आहे ना तिथे क्लीन जसं आपण लिवलाईनर रेल्वेमध्ये कंपल्सन करतोय याचा स्टीलचा त्याच्याऐवजी म्हणजे थोडंसं क्लीन हाईटच वाढायला लावायची प्रत्येकाला कंपल्सन.
But see, all permutation combination is possible. That's what zone wise is required, and further study is required. We just try to locate the area and then give the permission.
See, what is important is to have a master plan for the stormwater drainage system. In fact, if it is a new city, it must start from the master plan of a drainage system, and one must learn from the experience of Navi Mumbai and some areas of Vasai Vihar also, where first thing that was studied was the stormwater system. And of course, for cities like Mumbai, where you may be knowing that there was a Brimsovat World Bank sponsored study for Mumbai. I don't know what is there for Pune. So there has to be a master plan dedicated only to stormwater drainage system of the city. As a part of the master plan, one can also define what is going to be the plinth levels for different buildings in different parts of the city. I don't know whether for Pune we have a map of that kind where you know that if a building is to be constructed here, its height has to be this much. Of course, this has to be intelligently decided because just because there is going to be a flood once in 10 years, once in 15 years, you cannot raise all the plinth heights. And we know that the rain pattern, the flood happens when there are excessive rainfalls. One cannot design our stormwater system for such excessive rainfall. For Mumbai, in 2006, 2005, 940 millimeters of rain in 24 hours. You cannot design anything for this kind of thing. One can design for 100 millimeters per hour, that's the maximum. So basically there has to be a master plan, and all these restrictions, regulations must flow from a master plan which is dedicated only to stormwater drainage system. And then of course maintenance, etc. These are all management issues, city management issues which must be attended to properly. Thank you.
Yeah, correct. Yes, correct. Your suggestion is correct. We need a master plan.
In the development plan that is new town, and everything has been taken care.
I don't know what is the situation here.
Here.
No, what is the flooding situation here?
Sir, wait a second.
Yes, over river is there and in the but housing body was somewhat on the waste. There will be a level difference. So everything has been there.
But still you are not specifying the level or flood level.
We are not specifying.
Sir, you have any question?
It's a matter of detailing the
Meshram sir, you have any question? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. I have to raise one issue. The Shivaji's presentation was really focusing on flood risk assessment. So let us, because it has got the limitations, you cannot expect her to study everything which is related with the, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can hear.
You cannot expect her to really study everything which is related with the flood, but her limitation was to study and identify the flood risk assessment, which she has done very, very efficiently. She has identified the two issues, that is a high risk zone, that is high risk areas in the Pune and low risk areas in the Pune also. As far as the questions of the mitigation is concerned, that are the after effects of the floods which are required to be taken into consideration. That is not the questions which has been raised just now. But these flood controls measures are required to be taken. That is all the low-lying areas where the encroachments has been taken place. That is what is required to be removed, because they are the first casualties when the flood occurs in the river. So that first casualty we have to take into the consideration. Then you have to remove these low-lying areas in encroachment, because they are at the high risk. And this is what is done in the Delhi. What they generally do is that when the rainy season comes or when there is a warning of the flood, all these low-lying areas, the people settle in the low-lying areas or encroach in the low-lying areas, they are just removed and they come on the road where the high elevations are there. So these are the measures required to be taken, and you cannot expect her to really study each and everything which is related with the flood. And we generally prepare the area drainage plan as per the master plans are concerned. Area drainage plans are prepared, and all these factors are required to be taken into consideration. But her study was limited to the flood risk assessment. She has done very excellently, very well done. Thank you, Shivani.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. If no more questions is there, we will conclude now. I request Sharad Patil to. Mudula, what is your aim of the project?
To understand whether high density or low density will impact, what level of density will impact livability, how can we enhance livability through density?
What level of density can impact livability?
Better livability.
There are way of positive and negative relations for all. Actually, we wanted to find out which are positive and negative. Okay. Thank you all. We are at the end of the session. I request Sharad Patil to say vote of thanks.
Today's brainstorming session on various planning issues organized at Pune Center. Firstly, I would like to thank Dr. Mishram sir, President ITPI Delhi, and Sri Kapoor sir, General Secretary ITPI Delhi, who allows arrange this session in Pune Center, and joining online and giving comments on presentation, which will help, I think, which will help for encouraging the speakers. I would thanks also MRC Mumbai, Sri Milind Patil sir, Chairman, Sri Bale sir, Vice Chairman, MRC Mumbai, Itpi Patil sir, Secretary. I would also thanks to Sri Gopale sir, Sri Apode sir, Forbes sir, Sri Avinash Patil sir, who joined online. I also thanks to Sri Lange sir, Sri Pendalkar sir, Sri Kiran Ramkir, Sri Watt sir, which is present here and sharing its very valuable things in planning. I also thanks to Sri Mankar sir and Sri Mithilesh Patil sir, who are coming from Bombay to participate and attending this session. And also I thanks to Rao sir, who coordinated and taking initiative to arrange this session. And also I also thanks to speakers who are presented, very well presented this session. Then lastly, I thanks to all the participants who are present here, students, planners, dignitaries who are joined online also, and who are support for this presentation to complete successfully. Thank you.
Where we are planning some PhD thesis or studying city problems, traffic problems. So here we must call every corporation officer concerned here, because in Pune development plan they have made a complete advisory committee and technical group. So officers of Pune corporations were involved. And as Mr. Pendarkar said, this study is very important. So while designing the new town, we have taken which are the two rivers which floods and what is the maximum level, high level, ridge level, and therefore we don't find any problem of the water logging in those new towns on the same lines of New Bombay. So that corporation officer must be asked for present, because they are not looking after any city problem. Our BP reports are only kept on the rack, and that's all. That is the most important.
Yeah, good suggestion. Maybe in another seminar we can call. Actually, I posted to the 3 reporters, sir. Please cover this email. Right. Nowadays, for all the reporter priority is only different. Okay. Last thing, we have to give some token of appreciation for the student. So she is left. So I just request Pendarkar sir to give a small gift to. So program is over now, and we will have a lunch.